Welcome back to part 2 of PSY 230 Personality Theory, the introductory chapter. In this portion of the lecture, we're going to talk more formally about what is a theory. Since this is personality theory, we need to have an understanding and general agreement on what theories do, what good theories are, what bad theories are, and so on. So we want to start by thinking about just what's a theory for? Whether you're talking about chemistry or physics or psychology, theories help us to understand what we observe or what we experience. In personality theorizing, you're attempting to put some structure on a set of experiences that we all have. We are all personality theorists in our everyday lives. What professional theorists are trying to do, though, is to come to some general agreements on what aspects of human experience are typical, what ones are not typical, and so on. So we use theory to help us understand phenomena that we observe. Theories typically, and in Western culture at least, by definition, include concepts and statements that show you how different aspects of the theory are related. So you have proposals of certain structures. For example, Freud has structures of personality, the id ego and the superego, and the theory includes statements about how these structures are interrelated, how they combine to function in people's psyches. Theoretical constructs or concepts or ideas should be carefully and clearly defined. Sometimes, especially when we talk about theories like Freud or even Maslow and Rogers, one of the major criticisms of their theoretical approaches is that many of their concepts can't be measured directly. Whereas in behavioral theory, that's really all you've got. You have observables. You have things that you can document, that you can measure. So we do have this standard in Western science that theoretical concepts should be operationalizable, which means that you should be able to define them in such a way that they can be measured through observable, documentable pieces of data. Another thing that theories do for us is that they help us to create hypotheses. They help us to know what questions to ask. Even if you have problems in other areas, like if you're Carl Rogers or Abraham Maslow and you're trying to operationalize a growth motive as a major underlying motivational principle in your theory, that's something you can't directly measure, like pouring it out in a cup or something. So you have to have some indirect ways to test your hypotheses related to those concepts. So we use our theories to generate hypotheses and to help us to conceptualize methods for asking and answering questions related to our theories. Your authors outline a set of quote-unquote good theory qualities. And these are important because each theory, as we move from chapter to chapter, is going to be evaluated in terms of these qualities. Verifiability is the first. A good scientific theory is one that can actually be tested. So one of the things you'll find with, say, Freudian theory is the major downfall as a scientific theory. Most Freudian ideas can't be tested, at least not directly, and that's a problem. So verifiable theories, they depend on having clearly operationalized variables and concepts. Freudian theory, as an example, has a problem on that score. Comprehensiveness is another dimension on which theories vary. Some theories are very comprehensive. They really kind of capture all of human experience, the cognitive, the affective, and the behavioral. And they do so efficiently. They try to use a relatively small number of variables or concepts to explain a wide range of human attributes, thoughts, feelings, and actions. When a theory is able to do that, when it's able to give you this comprehensive picture in a fairly straightforward way that allows us to explain the vast majority of human experiences, that's seen as a more powerful, comprehensive theory. And then you also want theories to have utility. They have to be actually useful. So you can have theories of all kinds of things, but if it doesn't resonate with people and have an actual applied value, there's not much use to it. So theories need to have what your authors call a heuristic value. They provide us important answers to important questions that we have about ourselves and about other people. So essentially the question is, can you apply the theory to real life? So when we get into Bandura and Beck, for example, I see those, Bandura's social learning theory and Beck's cognitive psychologies to be very, very applied. Bandura asks and answers questions about how do we learn from others to behave in certain ways. That has a tremendous applied value for helping us understand parenting, for helping us understand how to change behaviors that have become maladaptive. For Beck, the whole basis of cognitive behavioral therapy comes from his personality theorizing, from his work thinking about how people form expectations of the world and how those expectations, when they are pathological, can hurt us. And then how, in turn, cognitive therapies can restore people to healthier forms of thinking. Beyond the qualities that we're going to use to evaluate theories, we also have to think about what your authors call dynamics. Most of our theorists are going to spend some time thinking about the underlying kind of energies that drive us as people, the things that motivate us, the things that kind of control the way we move about our lives. When we're talking about dynamics, when your authors are using this word, dynamics, what they're talking about first off is that human beings, we're alive. I know this is a shock. We're constantly developing. We're constantly evolving. If the last couple of years have taught us anything, is that we're a resilient species. We tend to find ways to adapt, to modify the way we live and experience the world in order to continue to survive. Beyond that, even if we weren't facing challenges and being resilient, we are living systems where we are organic and we continue to grow and change across the lifespan. Another way of thinking about dynamics and the way the human experience is in fact dynamic is that people tend to, and this, we'll dig into this really deeply with the humanistic theories, people tend to want to grow. People tend to want greater awareness. They tend to want to evolve across their lifespans to become better than what they are currently. An outgrowth of that, we have to recognize that there are things that can get in the way. We have an understanding, and most of our theorists are going to have some set of principles that explain under what circumstances is growth going to be interfered with. In the chapters, they're going to be called obstacles to growth. So what are the things that are going to get in the way of this important internal dynamic of psychological growth? So for our clinical theorists, people like Freud and Jung and even Carl Rogers, what are the things in our lives that get in the way of us living our best lives? And since many of our theories are clinical in orientation, they originated either with psychiatrists like Freud and Jung or psychotherapists like Rogers and Beck. Many of these theories propose ways of intervening. And this is also true when we get to the end of the semester, excuse me, and we talk about the religious traditions that have been kind of incorporated into Western psychology, like Zen Buddhism. They're going to propose ways to improve yourself, ways to become more whole, ways to become healthier, and to overcome those obstacles. So when you look at these four dynamic areas, we are living beings. We strive toward growth. Growth can be interfered with, but theories can often offer us solutions to those obstacles to help us improve. And for your authors, for Frager and Fadiman, they see these four things as being really a way for you to orient yourself to each theory. So how is it that this theorist is honoring us as living beings? How is this theorist conceptualizing growth? How is this theorist conceptualizing obstacles to growth? And how is this theory helping us understand how to become better, to overcome obstacles? Now, the last thing that we'll talk about in this introduction is some other elements that your authors are going to use with each theory. They put this under the heading of structure. I'm not sure exactly why they've chosen that terminology, but you'll notice that in each chapter they're going to address the following ideas, because there are certain common things that all human beings share. One of those is we all have bodies, we have physicality. So we're human beings, as your authors put it. We breathe, we eat, we tense, relax. We are alive, we're physical. Some theories are very oriented toward the physical, to physiological processes. Others deny the existence of the body entirely. So you'll find that there's tremendous variability in how theorists deal with our physicality. So, for example, Freud, he sees us as biological organisms with biological predispositions. He sees the differences between males and females as being biological. Whereas the Zen Buddhists, the body is a figment. The body doesn't really exist. There is no objective reality, and it is just mentality. Another aspect that all theorists are going to have to deal with at some point is the fact that human beings are social. As your authors put it, we are social animals. We, like other kinds of social species, we make sense of ourselves and our world in concert with other humans through our interactions. And we grow and we develop and we change, we satisfy our needs with others. Not all the time and not completely, but we certainly do. Some theorists are very, very, like Karen Horney, very focused on relational aspects, or the feminist theorists tend to be very relational in their approach. They really put social relationships at the forefront of their theoretical approaches. For other theorists, not so much. Jung includes relationships, but he's really about the inner life of human beings and their struggle to figure out how to balance the competing components of their interior world. The concept of will is something that not all theorists are going to really explicitly talk about will. Some of them will talk about free will, like William James. When we did the chapter on James, that was a central piece of James' theory of consciousness, is that people have the ability to give attention and effort to choosing what they want to do and to embrace that. Skinner, on the other hand, thought that was a figment of our imagination, that you don't really have choice. You behave, what you do is a result of your reinforcement history. So theorists are going to differ in terms of how much free will individuals are given within that theoretical context. All of our theorists are going to deal somehow with emotion or what psychologists call affect. Humans are emotional beings. Remember those three components? They started off part one with we think, we feel, we act. So emotion is really something that theorists are going to deal with, and our theorists are going to deal with it in different ways. Some theorists are going to be, really focused on certain kinds of emotions. Like Freudian theory is really focused on anxiety and controlling anxiety. And other theorists are going to look at other things. Freud was also really into the emotions that are tapped into our sexuality as well. So each of our theorists is going to talk about emotion. Similarly, they're all going to talk in some way, usually in some roundabout way, about intellect, or more broadly about cognition, and this concept of rationality. This is in some ways connected to the concept from the previous slide of will. So some theories assume that human beings are basically irrational, that we believe things that just aren't true or logical, and we continue to pursue things based on those irrational ideas. Freud, for instance, thought we were basically irrational, and we just have to do the best we can to try and find a more rational way to conduct ourselves. Other theorists think we are quite rational. George Kelly, for instance, thinks that we are basically doing amateur science in our brains all the time to try and make sense of the world and behave in a way that's most efficient and rational. Each of our theorists can have a little bit different approach to that question of rationality and intellect. And then there's the concept of the self. Every theory is going to call it something different. Freud calls it the ego. Jung calls it the self-archetype. Each theory is going to have some different way of conceptualizing this thing that we call the self. If I gave you a piece of paper and I said, write me a paragraph telling me who you are, what you're doing is putting yourself on the page. Sometimes the self that we describe is accurate. Sometimes it's not. Remember that curated self that I described when I was talking about the internet? That self that we put out on social media, it's rarely who we are, at least not in a comprehensive sense. Theorists find it equally difficult to pin down exactly what self is and how it functions. So our theorists are going to spend a good chunk of time talking about that. And you'll notice that that's a thread that runs through every chapter, is how is this theorist dealing with the concept of the self. And then finally, each theory is going to have some way of conceptualizing someone who can help you on your journey. So sometimes it's a therapist, sometimes it is a guru, sometimes it's a teacher. So each of the theories is going to have ideas about who can help other people grow or have more satisfaction or live more fully in their lives. Each theory is going to have ideas about how someone can help you overcome your obstacles in your life or address your problematic thinking in your life. Each theory, especially the clinical ones, but also the ones that are based on religious traditions, they are going to have some specification of training that people need to have to be seen as skilled, to be seen as an appropriate person to be dispensing advice and helping you. So for the psychoanalysts, in our first few chapters, we're going to be talking about psychoanalysts. In the early days, basically, if you wanted to be a psychoanalyst to help people, you needed to undergo analysis yourself with a skilled analyst for a long period of time, and then under their tutelage get practice doing analysis, and then you could, kind of graduate to being a professional analyst. In more modern circumstances, that's been replaced by, graduate education and training. in psychology or psychiatry. Each system is also going to make very clear, well, I shouldn't say very clear, it's going to make demands on the people who are being therapists or being teachers, that they need to have certain skills in mind. And how they gain those skills is going to be specified in somewhat different ways. If you're talking about a religious tradition, becoming someone who has the skills to take on that teacher role, that mentor role, or that role as someone who guides others in their process of faith, each system is going to have different things to say about that along the way. So that really concludes our overview in these two videos. That gives you a sense of how your authors are going to organize their approach to each theorist. And that should be helpful to you as you start to unpack each theory in sequence.